Hello, everybody. This is now day 5 of this very long course on the 3D Generalist. I'm Andrew Silke. Let's get stuck into today's class now. I was going to get straight into Maya and do some 3D today. However, I've decided I've got a few more things that I usually, want to get students' heads into the correct mindset as we go forward. There's a bunch of stuff I want my students to know before we start moving. So I thought I would include those videos before the 3D. So unfortunately, no more 3D today. We're going to do a few more videos on mindset, and then we'll move into the 3D pretty soon. It'll all be happening before we know it. So this one's on the pot theory. So all my students will know about pot theory. It's something I coined from a book called Art and Fear by Ted Orland. And I heard this theory a long time ago. Now, it's a very practical art theory that enables you to get good quickly, to get really good fast. So it's like a bit of a shortcut. How do we shortcut getting good at art? So here we have a sculpt that I did in 2014. Now, I was already a pretty accomplished modeler by then. I'd modeled polygons on movies, but I'd never really sculpted before. And I decided to pick up Mudbox at this stage, and later I went to ZBrush. And I wanted to teach myself very quickly because I didn't have much time. I was very busy during the day. I only had about an hour a day to spend learning this sculpting thing. So I needed to shortcut it. So how did I do it? Well, I went from this sculpt here, which is actually about number 17. I actually didn't record the first ones because they were so rubbish. Even though I was a decent modeler, I only had 20 minutes to create these, and it was pretty hard going, and the models looked rubbish. But when I got up to about 17, I thought I could start recording this. So I recorded them all as time lapses. And then my intention was always to show this to my students as a teaching thing. And I do bring it up with my students every now and again, but I've never really sat down and done this class. So I'm quite excited here. So this lady here, this was number 17 in 20 minutes. So 20 minutes is pretty fast for sculpting, speed sculpts. And this guy here was number 78. So I did 78 pots. I call them pots, so we'll get into this and why. And then I managed to sculpt this guy in 20 minutes. So let's get to this lesson, and we're going to have a look at how I did that in sort of the middle of the class. All right. So here is a great quote by Ira Glass. Ira Glass is a legend. He is a radio storyteller. And he has this quote, which you can look up. And I'm actually going to introduce it into the third part of this talk. This is part 1, there's part 2 and part 3. In part 3, we'll actually go through the full quote of this. This is sort of a butchered quote of a much larger quote. And he says, the most important thing you can do is do a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you'll finish one story, because he's a storyteller. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close that gap, and your work will be as good as your ambitions. So he talks about how we all know what good art is, and we want to strive towards that. How do we get there? And he's saying, yeah, the most important thing you can do is a lot of work. Okay, so a large volume of work. That's what he's very big on. So we've got this idea of like, okay, we've got to get good. And he's talking about time in like 10 years improvement. And he's very big on sort of the similar things that I love to think about, is that you can really improve over time. We'll get back to Ira Glass in part 3 of this lesson series. However, now I want to concentrate on pot. So creativity is a learned skill. That's a theme that's going to run through all these videos. And this learned skill is like, well, how do we do this? How do we learn creativity? How do we get to be artistic? Because there's the myth of the artist that's just talent. And we're throwing that away and saying, okay, well, I believe you, Andrew, we can learn this stuff. So how do we do this? Well, there's a talk here that I created a long time ago, and I've put it into 3 parts. Creating a large volume of work. This is pot theory, and we'll get more into what the pot theory is in a second. Part 2 of this talk, which I'll do tomorrow, is loving the plateau. So we'll get more into what that's about then. And part 3 is devils in the details. That's the third talk that I'll do in a couple of days there. So let's get into pot theory, which is part 1, creating a large volume of work. So what is pot theory? What is this mystical art theory, pot theory? Well, it's by Ted Orland, and he wrote a book called Art and Fear, and it's a quote from this. Now, I stumbled upon this about in the year 2000. I was doing it, and I reverse engineered some stuff that was happening for me at work, and I'll get into that in a second. And I realized that, wow, this is a great theory. So here's the quote. The ceramics teacher announced on the opening day that he was dividing the class into 2 groups. All of those on the left side of the studio, he said, would be graded solely on the quality of the work that they produced. All of those on the right, solely on its quality. So the left-hand side would be on the quantity of work, and the right-hand side would be the quality. All right, so let's keep going here. His producer was simple. On the final day of class, he would bring his bathroom scales and weigh the work of the quantity group, so just however heavy it was. If there was 50 pounds of pots, he rated an A. If there's 40 pounds, B, and so on. Those on the other side of the class, being graded on quality, however, needed to produce only 1 pot, albeit a perfect one, to get an A. So it just had to be, a marvelously quality, awesome pot. So, came grading time, and a curious fact emerged. The works of the highest quality were all produced by the group being graded for quantity. It seems that while the quantity group was busily churning out piles of work and learning from their mistakes, the quality group had sat theorizing about perfection, and in the end had little more to show for their efforts than the grandiose theories and a pile of dead clay. So that's by a book, Art and Fear, by Ted Orland. Go and check it out. Have a read of that book. It's a great one. So let's get on to that. Well, first I'll just stay here. Why was this such an epiphany moment for me? So this epiphany happened to me in about the year 2000, I think, and I can date that because we have this next picture. So I was working at Chrome Studios at the time, which is now a defunct games company. I think there's still a version of it floating around. And we were making this game called Cat Burglar. Now, don't blame me for the art. The character that was given to me, and it was sketched, so I had to model it. And I was a modeler, and I felt like I was very much out of my depth. I was junior, and it was my first year of work in the industry, and I was having to model and animate and rig this cutscene with a good friend of mine, James. And we were making everything, like all these characters, and it was an insane amount of work. And we were having to do it quite quickly. Now, I modeled up the lead character first, because, you model up the lead character first. And then I went about and I modeled the second and third and fourth and fifth characters and so forth. And I think I modeled maybe about 8 to 9 different characters, and James was doing the same thing. And when I got to those later characters, I started realizing, I said to Steve, my boss, I said, "Hey, Steve, I think we're going to have to go back and fix up this main character." I had spent the most amount of time on this character out of all of them, but I was starting to build these characters, at least in the modeling phase, that were looking so much more appealing, and I was doing it in a day. I was doing it much quicker than I had at the start of this character that you see here. This is the main character, Cat. So he allowed me to go back and model the main character again, and of course I banged it out much quicker than I did the first time. I remember this taking me weeks and weeks, and then just in a couple of days I'd built her from scratch again. And this is what she turned out like, which is much more true to what the actual artwork is. Now, again, don't blame me for a cat burglar in a tight suit, but you can see the quality difference there. This is the year 2000 at Chrome Studios. And we've got cat burglar here, and I hope that you guys can see the difference, because for me, it's a night and day. And I'm still not perfect here by any stretch. This is my first year modeling and rigging, and I had to animate and do all these other things along with James. So we were learning really hardcore stuff on that first year of work. This was a game cinematic, but you can see the difference there. Now, I read that quote about the pot theory and I went, aha, this is totally true. I'd been forced to do these pots at this games company, and I was just noticing this happening to myself. I was creating not only faster characters, but I was creating much more quality characters too. And then after this project got put on the bin and it got sidetracked, I then went and worked on another game called Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, which you can look up. It's a very old game, but it's been redubbed and it's out there in the wilderness. And I modeled a bunch of characters on that, including the main character and a whole bunch of characters there. So I continued to build characters in this pot-like way. And by the end of those 2 years at this game studio, I'd built and rigged and animated so many characters, 20, 25 characters. And that really gave me this great start to my career that all I wanted to be was an animator. I really didn't want to do the whole pipeline. I didn't want to be a rigger, for sure. But it was this sort of process of this building and rigging and animating characters that really got me into sort of this mindset that I still carry today. It's like, hey guys, we can do it all. And that came out of this time of my life, modeling and building characters. So many years later, cut to sculpting is coming out. I had been animating professionally for a number of years. I was decent at topology and modeling. And there's this new thing, sculpting, that had come out, in 2008, but I'd missed it because, I was animating on movies. And I came back and I had a fair bit of time back in teaching. And so I decided to hey, why don't I give the sculpting thing a try? So this was pot number 17. So here I've got this theory in my head, and this theory sort of came from Nancy Beeman, who's quite a famous Disney artist. I met her, and we would trade lessons. Like, I like to say that she was teaching me how to draw and I was teaching her how 3D works, and we both kind of didn't want to learn the other person's thing. Although I do want to learn drawing, I didn't have the time, and I'm sure she's the same in reverse. So we had a lot of chats, but one thing that really stuck to me about what Nancy said is she said that in a life drawing, if anyone's familiar with that's drawing, nude ladies and men and artistic stuff. It's a bit of a thing with drawing. She said the warm-up sketches are like 2 minutes, and then you go to the 5 minutes and then the 10 minutes, and the 10 minutes is the one that you usually present. That's your piece. And the aim of this is kind of like pot theory, and I think pot theory is very big in drawing. I'll get to that in a second. But she said, look, at Disney, when we're learning to draw, 2 minutes is a super long amount of time. So what they encouraged to do, or what they tried to do at Disney when she was there at least, is they'd try to do like 10-second thumbnails. So how fast can you draw? And obviously 10 seconds, it's not going to be a masterpiece. But she's like, this is really the way of an animator. You're drawing so much, you need to be fast. You need to draw and draw and draw. You've heard the analogy, fill a sketchbook if you're at all related to 2D art. These Disney animators, they really had to hone that craft. So they needed to draw and draw and draw. So this sculpting thing was happening, and I was really impressed that people were banging out sculpts in an hour. Like, wow, like in an hour, that's pretty gnarly. And I was really impressed, and I was like, I need to just start doing the sculpting thing too. But I didn't have any time. Like, I really didn't have any time. I was full-time teaching at that time. I was doing a lot of other stuff during the day, doing a lot of research into other 3D areas. I didn't really have a lot of time to do the sculpting. So I was like, well, if other people are doing it in an hour, then I'll be like Nancy and try to do it in 20 minutes. So I'll really cut down my time and try to do the sculpting thing in 20 minutes. Now, first 16 of those 20-minute exercises didn't really turn out, so we're not seeing those. I wish I had recorded them, but I didn't. This one actually turned out okay for 20 minutes. I was pretty happy with that for 20 minutes at the time. However, I kept going, sort of trusting this pot theory, trusting this fill a sketchbook mentality. These days, the sculptors call it, there's a Facebook group called 10,000 Hours, and it's sketching. They call it sketching because, you bang out something pretty quick. Well, I was trying to really shortcut that as much as I could, so 20 minutes was my goal. And then after 78, this was the 78th version of this sumo wrestling guy. So you can see there's quite a huge difference in quality. Now, I've kind of cherry-picked these. Of course, the work goes up and down, and you have good days and bad days, and some of them didn't turn out so good even around the 70s. But as you can see, there's quite a vast difference between those two sculpts there. And that was usually I just did one or two a day, and that was my hour by the time that you prepped it and everything and recorded it. So let's have a look at this, because I did record it. So here is pot number 17. And it's just interesting to watch the way that I sculpted, I think. So I've really speeded this into 2 minutes. This is 20 minutes in 2 minutes. So you're seeing it quite quick. And this is me at the 17th pot. And, I didn't really have a mentor or anything. I just looked at a lot of videos on the web, and, I think I was savvy enough by this stage. I think I could figure it out myself. But I did look at a lot of tutorials and YouTube videos, sort of about Mudbox at the stage, because I was really having trouble. But then I found a couple of videos that really showed me that, Mudbox could be used very effectively, and I got better and better slowly. So this is me you can sort of see that I'm lacking confidence in this video. I'm not totally terrible, but you'll see in the next video how much more confident I am after the 20 minutes. So I really want to watch this all the way through and just look at the way that I'm being quite tentative and slowly sort of almost like the original pot theory, just detailing and just pushing it around and trying to be really I don't know, student-y. This is I knew form by then, but usually with form it would just take me a day and I'd just noodle it around until it looked good. But of course, here I don't have a day to work with. I've only got 20 minutes. So this is like 4 minutes left now. You can see that timer in the bottom right, and I'm trying to get these eyes working, and you can see the way that I'm sculpting here is, it's not terrible, but in 20 minutes, you see that head is very lumpy, looking a bit alien-like. Coming down here into the minute, it's hard for me to watch this. I am forcing us to watch this all the way through. So we get there, and there it is, 20 minutes. That's where I stopped now. Obviously, I would keep going and make that a lot better, but 20 minutes, there you go. So cut to pot number 78 now. So now we're doing pot theory. And here I am. And by this stage, like, I was always going from reference. So there was reference for that pot 7. It was just on the other monitor that you couldn't see. So one of the guys that I was following is like, well, if you want to match the reference, just put it on top of your model. And I was like, that would help, wouldn't it? Like, so if you saw me at the beginning there, I'm literally using it to rotoscope the shape a little bit. But of course, you can't do that. Like, that alone is not going to help you. This is a 3D sculpt. Now, you can see this is just 5 minutes down now. I'm already sculpting, so I'm sculpting a lot quicker. I'd found the magical wax brush in Mudbox, which is very similar to clay buildup in ZBrush, and it sort of revolutionized the way that I thought about sculpting and the way that I went about it. Now, even I watch this now, and in ZBrush, I'd be a lot more confident even than I was here. And there's proportions that are wrong with this sculpt and whatever, if you really look. However, you can see the confidence difference in my sculpting ability here, how much quicker and more confident I'm going in. And if you have ever watched a really genius 2D artist sketch, you can see they just make these beautiful lines so quickly. And I think that is the real bonus of sketching, is that if you do fill sketchbooks and you sketch year after year after year, you can get incredibly good at drawing. And one day I would like to get good at drawing too. I just haven't had the time to really get into 2D. I could always draw reasonably well, but not like Disney guys, that's for sure. So you can see that coming together there. I'm at like 2 minutes left now. And I'm really working a lot more broad and confidently. And I hope that shows you the difference of the same guy, just a few months apart, with sculpting, 1 to 2 models a day, and how much that can be. So the profile, not the greatest, but certainly around the front here, it's starting to look pretty decent in comparison to what we had seen before. So then here we've got another one, which I did in ZBrush. Now I'm just skipping ahead here, and you can see this Bill Murray character, giving myself a bit more time. Headed over to ZBrush. ZBrush was all the rage. I could see people doing stuff. We didn't have to start from a base mesh. Could start from a sphere. Could be far more flowing. And this is me in ZBrush. This is a bit faster now. I've compressed this faster. And the sculpt is longer. It's an hour and a half-ish. So let's just skip through here, and you can see doing similar things in ZBrush, matching ref. On matching ref, a lot of students believe that that's somehow cheating, but the aim of a 3D artist is really to match reference. So you'll always get a sketch, or you often get a sketch from your art director or somebody. So the goal is actually to match it as accurately as possible. And I find so few people actually put the artwork over the top and just sort of like fade it up and down to see if the proportions are correct. So that's a great tip there. You'll make everyone happy in your life if you just put the other person's art over the top and match it. Like, that's not cheating in our world. So here I had this, I really enjoyed ZBrush. It's a different way of working from Mudbox, where you had to have a base mesh. And I've got this like technique of, doing Dynamesh and then ZRemesher at a certain time, and then using the sculpt levels up and down and creating a base mesh and blah, blah. I really got good at that over time. And then I sort of gave it up because I sort of thought, okay, I've got this now. And I went back to other things. I haven't really sculpted much since then, but it did come out. If you see the rhino that I did on the site, I still have this sculpting ability now, and I know what it is, and I can get back into it. And I would love to get back into sculpting after a little bit of time. So here you can see me adding the details now, and I had this sort of whole thing and whole workflow. And when you do have a bit more time, like that hour and a half, you can see how you can get better and better. And we won't watch all of this, but you can sort of see how very quickly you can start to throw models together. And that's ZBrush. Now, doing a whole nother talk about the ZBrush trap and how the ZBrush cowboys, this is not really production modeling and yada, 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 yada. So sculpting is a specific thing, should not be focused on. There is a time and a place to do sculpting. Sculpting is super fun, but don't think that this is going to get you a job, this stuff, when you're a beginner. This is generally not the path that I teach. Now, after I did this sculpting thing and sculpted a whole bunch of heads, like 100 and something, I had this model which looked a lot better than this with textures. But I was always quite happy with this model. I built it in like 2006 or something like that. And after I did sculpting one day, I looked at it and I was like, oh God, this could be heaps better, because I'd done all these pots now, and I looked at this model that I designed myself, and no reference. I was like, wow, I could just make this a whole lot better. So this is in about 2015-ish. And then you can see that before it was just what I did in polygons, modeling old school 2006. And then from my sculpting at time, I was really starting to see shapes a lot better and link things together. Now you can see how this is not a finished model by any stage, but just the difference in the basic quality shape. I just went in and had a quick play. Like, I really didn't want to do a lot. I am going to come back to him and finish him off like in the same sort of quality level as Rhino at some stage, I've always told myself. But you can see the difference in the appeal of the character there. And this is me just going off reference, other people's sketches, I guess you could say. And I wasn't designing a lot, and I came back to one of my own designs and went, wow, I can make this a lot better and much more interesting and play with shapes. And really the sculpting helps you out in this way. All right. So then obviously this was for my students. So here's a student reel. I have updated this, like a lot of the work that I've shown previously. I've just added a few more pieces that were missing. From teaching students, I was really trying to apply this pot theory as much as I can, educate them on all the different ways that I was thinking. And, it's just amazing to watch students before and afters, like, where they start. As I mentioned in the talent is overrated class, the before and after of students is quite incredible. And, just this large volume of work that Ira Glass sort of talks about, I've seen it firsthand with students, and also through students teaching students. I mean, all these students are kind of my pots in a sense. Like, as a teacher, you're learning from your students, and each student shows you something different. And then after you've taught 100 students, you start to really nail your teaching techniques a lot better. So hopefully these are kind of like my pots under my belt. My large volume of work is my students over the last 7 or 8 years that I can now bring into this course that we're about to teach. Another pot thing that I'm doing at the moment is actually these videos. So the video that you're watching right now is me kind of blabbering with this bad webcam and terrible lighting and all this sort of stuff. Of course, I'm going to get a webcam, I'm going to get some lights, I'm going to look a bit more pro, probably upgrade my mic. So you'll see these on the other channel, like being scrubbed up, and I'm using these tutorials here as like my pots and learning how to talk into the microphone a little bit better and be a little bit more high energy, because I've got a bit of a low energy talking. So that's sort of the point of these tutorials, is for me, selfishly, to get better at webcam and YouTubing, because I'm an introvert. I don't want to be doing this. This is just what we have to do these days if you want to do this type of stuff. So there you go, guys. That is pot theory. I think that is definitely the end of this talk. I hope that makes sense. Tomorrow we're going to get into Learning to Love the Plateau. That's one of my favorites. It's from a great book called Mastery by George Leonard. And we've got the one after that, is Devils in the Details, which is really the finishing stage of this. These are really important classes because I'll relate to them back when I'm doing the teaching in the course. So I hope you guys enjoyed. There you go.